We have a great panel. I really just wanted to start by saying I really appreciate that past panel. Maritime issues near and dear to my heart, and just a lot of changes in the industry, and changes on top of changes in the ocean environment, on top of changes in terms of our use of the ocean environment. So much to think about and talk about there. And again, really appreciate the prior panel's conversation. We have a great panel ourselves here. We're going to be diving a little deeper into some offshore wind issues, particularly as they relate to community impacts and economic opportunities. And I'm really excited about our panelists. We've got a great representation of some different perspectives, some folks you may not otherwise be hearing from, and some thoughts on how the bigger picture of offshore wind can play into some of our regional specific activities, as well as looking ahead to some potential opportunities for greater collaboration. So without much further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, who will be talking on transmission and landside impacts. So Jim Ferris will be talking to us from the Division of Clean Energy at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, where he is Deputy Director. So Jim, I am going to turn it over to you.
Mike, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First, thank you, Marco, for giving me this opportunity to talk about New Jersey's approach to transmission of offshore wind generated electricity. Next slide, please. So New Jersey's offshore wind transmission goals, as you see here, are what are informing excuse me, and guiding our work on offshore wind transmission. Above all is our state goal to produce 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030, and to be able to inject that offshore wind into our transmission and distribution system. We have a goal to try to minimize the number of cables crossing shore and minimize environmental and fishing impacts. I think those two goals kind of go together. The more cables that we need to lay in the ocean, the more beach crossings that we need to make, the more potential impacts to the marine environment and our commercial and recreational fishermen. So we certainly are endeavoring to minimize the number of cables. We certainly also are striving to lower the overall cost of offshore wind generation and transmission, excuse me again, and to consider regional collaboration. I'll talk a little bit on the next slide about what the state agreement approach that New Jersey is taking is, and it is a New Jersey focused initiative, but we certainly do appreciate the need for regional collaboration, and I think our approach will lend itself eventually to regional collaboration. We also want to encourage competition, both amongst transmission developers and generation developers, and above all, we need to achieve these goals at the lowest reasonable cost and lowest possible risk to New Jersey's ratepayers. Next, please. So New Jersey is taking advantage of a program in PJM, our regional grid operator, in PJM's operating agreement that provides for any PJM state to essentially ask PJM to include in their regional transmission expansion planning, RTEP, that particular state's public policy. And it can be any public policy. That vehicle is called the state agreement approach. New Jersey is the first state to take advantage of the SAA process. And we have been collaborating quite extensively with PJM for probably at least a couple of years now on how this SAA will develop and has developed. PJM has conducted several screening analyses for us. We've talked about potential points of interconnection. We've talked about how to model these particular scenarios. And as a result of some initial screening that PJM did, we narrowed down what we wanted to do, New Jersey and PJM collaboratively, regarding this transmission approach. Next, please. This sketch may be familiar to some of you. I think every time I've given any talk on our state agreement approach, and any of my colleagues have, we generally highlight this sketch, but we think it really does give a good graphic on what we are trying to do with our transmission approach. So through that collaboration with PJM and that initial screening and analysis, we identified 4 onshore points of interconnection. And those you see here, Dean, Smithburg, Larrabee, and Cardiff. And we've asked transmission developers for proposals in 4 different options, and developers were free to submit proposals for 1 or more of these options. So the first option that you see in green, we call option 1A, are onshore upgrades needed to inject offshore wind into those 4 points of interconnection. Now, we also gave transmission developers the opportunity to propose other points of interconnection. And in fact, we did get quite a few other points of interconnection proposed by transmission developers. We wanted to really, as much as possible, leave this up to the experts, to the transmission developers, as to how best to get our 7,500 megawatts across the shore and into the transmission system. Option 1B, which you see in orange on this sketch, is about bringing the points of interconnection, or a point of interconnection, closer to the beach. As I think is the case in most states, our grid closer to the shore is less robust than farther inland. You'll see that many of these points of interconnection are inland POIs. And so option 1B is about getting this upgraded grid closer to the shore to make it easier to for offshore wind farms to interconnect. The yellow option that you see, we call option 2, is collecting offshore wind generation in the ocean, either through the project's offshore substations or by developers constructing new offshore substations or offshore collector stations to try to collect projects in the ocean and minimize those number of shore crossings that multiple projects would otherwise need to accomplish. Finally, option 3 in blue is what is, I guess, normally or generally referred to as a backbone, and that is connecting either individual projects or offshore substations or offshore collector platforms together to form more of what would normally be called an ocean grid. We think particularly in these option 2 and option 3 projects will give us, I think, a good opportunity for future regional collaboration. You know, we've kicked around ourselves and with some of our partner offshore wind states that, you know, at some point we may have an offshore wind grid running from Maine to South Carolina. And we're thinking that perhaps this New Jersey option could be the first link in that extensive offshore grid. Next slide, please. Just quickly, kind of the schedule and quick history of where we've been and where we're going. New Jersey formally requested PJM incorporate our public policy through SAA back in November of 2020. PJM issued a solicitation window in April of 21, which closed in September of 21. We received proposals from 13 transmission developers for a total of 80 projects spread amongst all 4 of those options. And I think this great interest that we received, I think really validates both the industry's need and recognition that a coordinated transmission approach is the way to go. I think it validated the fact that we are on the right track with how we structured the solicitation. We weren't sure how many proposals or projects we would receive. We were extremely pleased when we saw the number of entities and the number of projects. Of course, about 10 seconds after we got over being pleased with it, we realized, now we have to evaluate 80 projects and from 13 different entities. So it's been a challenge. PJM has been a great partner with us throughout this process. PJM is conducting a considerable amount of this evaluation. BPU staff, along with a consultant, are also conducting these evaluations. We meet regularly with PJM to discuss the evaluation, and that is ongoing. A very positive development happened just last month when FERC approved the state agreement approach agreement that was drafted by BPU and PJM, which really lays out how these projects, if selected, would be administered both by PJM and by BPU, and how we would incorporate the generation developers into this process. We were very pleased that FERC approved this agreement as submitted. We expect our board to make a decision on state agreement approach projects or projects in October. I will point out that the BPU board is the ultimate decision maker here, and the board does have the option to decide to choose no projects. If after this evaluation, the result seems to be that none of these projects will satisfy our needs or satisfy our goals, and New Jersey is under no obligation to select any of these projects. So that decision will be made in October. You may have seen that we pushed our 3rd generation solicitation back about 3 or 4 months so that we could incorporate an SAA decision into our 3rd generation solicitation so that we can tell generation developers fully what they need to do relative to transmission. Will it be a particular point of interconnection that they must get to? Will there be an ocean substation or collector station that they need to get to? So we want to be able to tell generation developers in our 3rd solicitation really as much as we can about what we expect from them in their transmission portion of their proposal. And then finally, we're expecting for our solicitation 3 projects commercial operation date in the 2030, 2031 range, which also obviously would be the range when we would need any of these state agreement approach projects to be completed. Next, please. I'm going to go through a list of just some key considerations that went into both the development of the SAA solicitation and that are going into our evaluation. Next, please. One is state and federal permitting. We've been working very closely with DEP and with BOEM on coordinating and evaluating how permitting will factor into our recommendations to our board. We are very concerned about timing and schedule compatibility. Obviously in October of this year, state and federal permitting will not be resolved, but any decision by the board, any project selected, that selection will be subject to successfully obtaining any and all state, local, and federal permits. Next, please. We're very focused on cost. We're very focused on the potential for Department of Energy or federal funding for these projects. There is an investment tax credit of 30% that is available to generation projects and transmission components of generation projects conducted as part of the generation construction. That investment tax credit does not, at this point, extend to transmission-only projects, even if they are related to generation projects. So 30% tax credit is a significant cost savings. We have been working with our federal representatives. The Build Back Better bill actually did extend the ITC to transmission-only projects. We're hoping that there will be some relief there and that these projects will be able to take advantage of ITC and any potential DOE funding. Next. Next, please. Thank you. As I said, we're very concerned about environmental and fisheries impact. Again, we have worked very closely and are working very closely with DEP on the evaluation of the environmental and fisheries impacts. We did require transmission developers to submit environmental and fisheries impact and mitigation plans as part of their proposals. And we are reviewing those, as I said, quite extensively with DEP. Next. We're looking very closely at technology, HVAC versus HVDC, and how that relates to both minimizing impacts, how it relates to potentially minimizing number of cables, how it impacts cost, how it impacts potential supply chain issues and supply chain shortages. So it is something that is very much a key consideration, both in the solicitation and in our evaluation. Next. Very concerned, I touched a little bit on schedule on the previous slide. Obviously, we want to make sure that any transmission project is ready when a generation project needs it. We want to make sure that transmission projects are not completed too soon, so that ratepayers may be paying for an asset that is not being fully utilized for some period of time. That schedule compatibility and what has been called project on project risk is something we are looking at very closely, as well as mechanisms by which both schedule and cost can be controlled. We did ask for developers to submit cost control provisions limiting their ROIs, schedule impacts as part of their proposal. So we're looking very closely at those two considerations. Next. As I mentioned, potential regional coordination is certainly on our minds. I think right now we are really mainly focused on this New Jersey initiative and being ready for our New Jersey projects. But we've got a lot of interesting projects and a lot of interesting proposals that could develop into regional collaboration. And so we're looking at that as well. And next, and I think this is the last one, yes, as always, and as I said on the first slide under our goals, we recognize that although the state agreement approach, we believe will lower the overall cost of offshore wind generation and transmission, we take our responsibilities to guard ratepayer funds very seriously. And everything that we do will be with an eye to minimize ratepayer costs and risk to ratepayers. And next, and I believe that's it. Thank you very much. Look forward to answering questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. That was really informational, and there's so much to unpack there in all these different aspects of planning. I know we've got some great questions coming in. We're going to hold those for the moment as we move to our next speaker, Chris Gullickson. Chris is the Director for Economic Development at the Port of Virginia and is going to talk to us a little bit about some of the economic opportunities they see there. So Chris, take it away.
Mike, thank you for that introduction. Appreciate it. And thank you for everyone joining this morning's webinar. I also will comment, really appreciate the comments by the last panel. That was very topical and obviously something that is important to the Port of Virginia, our continued growth and the growth of offshore wind. I think something that really resonates with me and it truly is, we've seen it firsthand, is just the partnership between all bodies to make sure that these fairways and shipping channels stay clear and safe while maintaining areas out there for opportunities like offshore wind. So again, Chris Gullickson with the Port of Virginia, Director of Economic Development, have really the neat opportunity and great fortune to be part of a team and a really world-class port with something in front of us around offshore wind that's going to be transformative, not only for the Commonwealth, but ultimately our Hampton Roads Harbor, and really bring us new opportunities that we're excited to capture. Next slide, please. So just a little background for everybody on who the Port of Virginia is, what we are. We're a state authority, and we manage and operate six terminals throughout the Commonwealth, 4 of which are here in the Hampton Roads Harbor. Our primary business is centered around containers and obviously the movement of containers from vessels in and off our terminals and into commerce. We are really fortunate to be a deep water harbor here in Virginia with 50-foot inbound, outbound shipping channels and going deeper. I think it was mentioned by Sean and by John as well in the last panel. The vessels are only getting larger, the container ships, and there are a lot of benefits to that. Both from a commercial perspective and of course from an environmental perspective. And Hampton Roads and the Port of Virginia are really poised to be one of those East Coast harbors with not only the deep water, but also the wide channels, which will allow for a fluid two-way flow of marine, commercial and defense traffic coming in and out of this harbor. And that's a real benefit, not only for today's business, but what we're talking about around offshore wind. With the unlimited air draft, that being such an issue and concern for a challenge for many ports, that's something here in Virginia we don't face, and I think will be one of the primary factors on how we're able to really leverage what are world-class facilities within the harbor to deploy these large offshore wind turbines in a fully stood-up position on these purpose-built wind turbine installation vessels like the one Dominion Energy is currently building, the Charybdis. Again, we're 18 miles to open ocean. We really do provide a central mid-Atlantic location here in Virginia. And as a port, we've continued to invest on our on-terminal capacity. And that really plays into how we've got here around offshore wind. Over the past 36 months, we've invested over $800 million directly on terminal to add our capacity and add to capacity for handling ocean shipping containers. And there's a benefit in how that plays into offshore wind. It really allowed for us to look at our portfolio of marine terminals here in the harbor and focus investment where appropriate and take a facility, Portsmouth Marine Terminal, and really look to reposition that facility. What was a legacy facility, one which needed an investment and really, for our eyes, was suited to help support the continued growth and opportunities around wind. Next slide, please. So I think I'd just break down. Here's a photo which really, obviously, none of us really thought highly of, but back in May of 2020, and when volumes and obviously all of us were locked down, and there was obviously a certain amount of unknown what the months to come would hold. This photo really just shows you the blank slate we had with PMT, but it goes beyond, or goes way before 2020, back into a period where, back in 17, we had an announcement with Dong Energy, which obviously is now Ørsted, around the CVOW research project. That's the Coastal Virginia offshore wind research project that has two wind turbines. They're 6 megawatt SGRE Siemens wind turbines in federal waters. Those are the first two offshore wind turbines that were out there in federal waters. And, we started that dialogue, understanding the opportunity at that point, and really trying to figure out how do we as a port and also as an economic development sort of group continue to look at assets within the harbor, both with the Port Authority and privately controlled assets, to potentially capture this new industry. So in 2020, we definitely felt some pain, but to start the year off, we did make a formal announcement with Ørsted for a 40-acre footprint there at Portsmouth Marine Terminal. That was sort of our first, I would say, stake in the ground, where Virginia, I think, made it quite apparent. Not only did we have the research project underway and that installation taking place off the coast, but really letting industry know that this was something we were poised to want to attract and bring. So we made that announcement, and then shortly thereafter, while we had ongoing conversations at that point with various opportunities, both on the developer side and more importantly on the OEM manufacturing side, because that is the two sides to this equation. We love the opportunities for handling this freight and cargo and learning this business, but also more importantly, creating the jobs tied to this new opportunity. And so in the governor's budget in 2020, we had the $40 million dedicated towards the infrastructure improvement necessary to support these needed loads. Portsmouth Marine Terminal is a 267-acre facility, really large terminal, but by no means, when it was constructed and continued to be maintained, were the loads and the load-bearing capacity there on terminal anywhere near what's going to be required to support offshore wind. So we were very fortunate to have that $40 million fund or dollars placed in the budget to help us sort of leverage and support the attraction of some new opportunities. And so our first, I would say significant, our second win at PMT was with Dominion Energy back in August in 2021. We did make the public announcement that we had at least 72 acres to Dominion Energy to support both their CVOW project and projects to come there at Portsmouth Marine Terminal. So that's kind of on the front side of that photo. I have an exhibit on the next slide that gives a better idea. But in October, really proud with many years of hard work that went into working both at the state, regional, and local level in conjunction with an OEM. Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy did make a formal announcement of their plans to construct a green blade finishing facility. This is a really exciting opportunity with not only great investment into the PMT by Siemens, but also really neat jobs, new jobs, yet jobs our community is very eager and able to fill. So we made that formal announcement in October of 2021 for what is a little over 80-acre footprint. It probably grow a little bit by that too, but a significant footprint at PMT for a green blade finishing facility. And that was really Siemens' first, I would say, significant manufacturing announcement to be made here in the North American market. We were also into 2021 the beneficiaries of MARAD Port Infrastructure Development Grant of $20 million. That $20 million grant goes into supporting the infrastructure improvements there on the front side of this terminal for the Dominion Energy loadout. And then we did, in fact, issue an invitation for bid, which is still open as we speak in March of this year for the project for the 72 acres of improvement necessary to support the loading and staging of Dominion's projects, and again, many to come in the future. Next slide, please. And so this exhibit here kind of, I think, does a better job just breaking out the terminal from a section by section basis. You can see the Dominion Energy footprint there on the front left section. It's kind of broken into sections on how, I think at this point, as we sit here in 2022, how that project will stage out with the right side of their footprint sort of being where the staging and handling of the monopiles That's obviously the first element we'll begin to receive here at the end of 2023. Those will come off a vessel in a Mediterranean mooring style, meaning they'll back the vessel into the berth, and we will roll those on and off, off the delivery vessel where they'll be staged. And then there'll be to the left, a wind turbine installation sort of loadout pad. And that's where you kind of see some small little circles, and it's kind of where that line from Dominion Energy lands there in the center of the terminal. And that it kind of gives you a rough idea of where some of those, the staging, the final staging and loadout is going to take place, and some of the heaviest load points actually. And that's where some of the most significant enhancements, improvements are going to be required and necessary for the upfitment and support of the loadout to the wind turbine installation vessel, the Charybdis, for the CVAL project. And then to the right, kind of in the gray area, is the Ørsted 40-acre footprint. And then on the backlands here is the Siemens Gamesa. And that's for both the blade, green blade finishing, and then the storage, both incoming blades, and then obviously finished blades. And so we're eagerly and working with both teams, all teams here on this slide, to to really put these plans into action. They're all formalized, but really putting the projects in place. And we've got tremendous activity, and really are building an internal robust team to support this activity around offshore wind at PMT. Just to give you a sense on what the investments from infrastructure and what the awards have looked like. Siemens Gamesa did receive a $17 million MEI grant, which is a major employment incentive from the Commonwealth of Virginia. That's really for site readiness to bring PMT, again, focusing on the fact that there are certain needs and attributes around offshore wind at PMT. And really, I think we're all seeing up and down the coast that there's really not one terminal today that is in a condition to handle this product. So the 17.1 is really for site readiness. Again, more infrastructure upgrades out of that $40 million went towards the Dominion project, with $23 million for enhancements on the front side. We had the PID grant, and then obviously much more investment necessary to finalize and finish that project. And so it's just sort of an estimate, the $148 million, as we're still waiting for all bids and that to be awarded. But our definitely timeline and schedule at this point is by the third quarter of this calendar year, notice to proceed and construction begin on the enhancements, improvements there for Dominion Energy. Next slide, please. I thought I would just touch on, and this is from a request, I think, in our planning call, but I think it's something that the Port of Virginia is really taking a lead position, and that is, making it known and really demonstrating previously, but also setting a schedule of accountability for us as an operation, as we as the Port of Virginia will continue to drive our operation to remove carbon and get to that net zero carbon emissions by 2040. And I think I like this slide, the fact that it just shows you the downward trend, but just to put some numbers behind it, in 2017, we had approximately 70,000 tons, metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. We did about, as a port, about 2.7 million TEUs, that's containers, 20-foot equivalent units. We just had our best year ever as a port for container traffic in 2021, moving 3.5 million TEUs. And you can see in that time period where we've grown volume tremendously by almost 750,000 containers in that period, we've actually brought down our carbon emission levels by approximately about 18,000 metric tons. A lot of that's being achieved by the overall electrification process that we've undertaken in our expansion and our investments, and we'll continue to make those investments. And you can see both 2032, we will have, obviously decreased emissions overall by 65%, and again, driving towards that 2040 of having zero net carbon emissions. And that's both something very important for us as an operation, for the Commonwealth, and even, also for our customers, as many of those corporate partners of ours also have metrics and desires to want to get to that zero carbon by 2040. Then next slide, please. And just some of our current benchmarks. Again, I mentioned the 65% reduction in our greenhouse gas emission by 2017 to 2032. And then also something we're, obviously actively working through the different states framework on how we can begin to purchase all of our power from renewable energy. So very excited about the work underway there and hitting that 2032 date as, again, we drive towards 2040. So very appreciative of this time. I hope to have kept my remarks short enough so we can leave some questions. I know there are a number of good questions in the chat. So again, thank you for this, and hand it to the next speaker. Thank you, Mike.
Great, thank you, Chris. And I agree, there's some really exciting things happening in Virginia, and I think that's exhibited by your slides and some of the news that's just late breaking right now, even. So really appreciate your time today. And we do want to make sure we get time for questions, so we're going to move on to our final speaker, who is Josh Kaplowitz. Josh, welcome. Josh is the Vice President for Offshore Wind at American Clean Power Association, and he's going to give us a bit of his perspective from an organizational standpoint on the state of the American offshore wind industry. So Josh, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here, and great to see so many friends and former colleagues from my time at the DOI Solicitor's Office advising BOEM on offshore wind issues. I'm now at the American Clean Power Association. We are a trade association for companies across the clean power sector, encompassing the whole value chain, including developers, manufacturers, construction companies, utilities, financial firms, and corporate purchasers of clean energy. We do onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, and energy storage now. And on the offshore wind side, we represent every current developer of projects in the US, as well as all of the major OEMs, the Siemens, Gamesa, Vestas, and GEs. Next slide. So where are we in the US as an industry? Well, let's scope out for a second. Offshore wind is a global industry. It's not far from just in the US, with over 35 gigawatts installed at the end of 2020, and that number has only grown. But if you look way at the right corner of your screen there, you can see that the US has only installed 42 megawatts. That's 7 wind turbines. So we have some catching up to do. But we are on the right track. President Biden, early on in his administration, announced an ambitious but achievable goal of 30 gigawatts by 2030, 30 gigawatts installed by 2030. This goal will create 83,000 new jobs by our estimates. Will revitalize ports like the Port of Virginia and maritime trades. And perhaps most importantly, and Chris, I loved hearing about your carbon reduction efforts, that amount of offshore wind will avoid 78 million metric tons of CO2. Climate is the biggest threat facing our oceans, and while offshore wind alone will not solve the climate crisis, we absolutely need a full build out of offshore wind in order to get there. So how are we going to get that tiny little bar up to 30 gigawatts by 2030? Well, we think it's very possible. Next slide. And it starts with the states. The big reason that we are ramping up is because states have established offshore wind procurement targets rapidly since 2016. The latest state to do so, if you look at this, the chart's a little small, but if you look at it, Louisiana has come in earlier this year with a 5 gigawatt goal. But we're also tracking multiple East Coast states looking to increase their existing goals, and we have new states waiting in the wings, like California, Oregon, and even Delaware. Next slide. So more good news, offshore wind is declining in cost as technologies get better and as the domestic supply chain develops, capturing more economies of scale. And in fact, and you can see that in the chart, you can see that offshore wind is very competitive among other, in terms of unsubsidized least cost of energy across technologies. And in Europe, where the supply chain is fully built out and there's a mature industry, we've been seeing many projects in recent years are now completely subsidy free. Next slide. And one of the big drivers here is new technologies. I think even compared to other renewable technologies, you're seeing a curve of technological development in offshore wind that is really unrivaled. And a great example here, Chris mentioned, blade finishing for Siemens Gamesa. I'll talk. The example we have here is from actually I spent some time at GE, so I'm quite familiar with their Haliade X product. It is these machines, these offshore wind turbines are getting bigger. And this is good. It's actually good it's good from a economic perspective, and it's actually great from an environmental perspective. Perhaps counterintuitively, bigger machines can mean more clean energy with less environmental impact because you need few of them per acre. So the Haliade is, to give you a sense of just, you see the size comparison, but to give you another point of reference, onshore wind turbines average, new ones average 2 to 3 gigawatts. They are getting a little bigger, getting up to 5 and 6. But the Haliade X starts at 12 megawatts, and can be powered up to 14. And the next generation is going to be even more powerful in projects going forward. Next slide. And as a result, looking into the future, we're seeing that costs are going to continue to decline, forecast to fall by nearly 50% by 2050, when we want to have we aim to have a completely mature offshore wind industry. Next slide. So in order to get there, we need a project pipeline. And thankfully, our friends at BOEM have done a great job of establishing just that. So here's a map of all of the leases that are currently under development. We have the Block Island wind farm off of Rhode Island, the 2 turbines spinning off of Virginia Beach. But 18 additional projects are in the pipeline, have secured offtake from states, primarily through state solicitations. And most recently, we had a lease sale in the New York Bight that sold 6 leases that are expected to generate over 7 gigawatts of clean renewable energy. Next slide. But we're not BOEM is not stopping here. We're very excited about their path forward, where they have a schedule of lease sales between now and 2024. So we look forward to, in a mere 5 days, a lease sale off of the Carolina Long Bay down near Wilmington, and a number of other lease sales coming up over the horizon that are being actively planned. And there are actually comment periods open right now for the Central Atlantic, the area between Delaware and North Carolina, and off of the coast of Oregon. Next slide. So all of this translates into investment in jobs. We mentioned 83,000 jobs. They are happening. They are starting to happen now. And here is just a small representative list of investments that our members are making in onshore facilities. We're talking port upgrades, manufacturing facilities, and quite recently, vessel construction, the construction of a wind turbine installation vessel that will obviously port at the Port of Virginia, but is currently under construction down in the Gulf in Brownsville, Texas. So these benefits are certainly focused on the areas where development is happening, as one might expect, but they also spread to other areas with existing port infrastructure that is being revitalized. So a lot of construction expected to happen down in the Gulf and in the Southeast as well. And then if you go upstream, to who's producing the steel? Well, a lot of the steel for example, for the Charybdis wind turbine installation vessel is coming from states like Kentucky and Arkansas and West Virginia. So the benefits are not just limited to the coast; they go all the way inland. And are only going to increase as more projects start to be permitted and begin construction. Next slide. Vessels are a particularly important aspect of the supply chain. We need to build a ton of them. And most of these vessels, of the 27 different vessels that are going to be needed to build each offshore wind farm, are going to need to be built in the U.S. and crewed by American mariners because of the Jones Act. Some of them don't exist yet, and so in the short term, we're going to need to have foreign flag vessels be used for a few of these tasks. But in the aggregate, we're hoping to eventually shift to as many U.S. vessels as possible, which translates to huge economic opportunity for shipyards like the Port of Virginia and for the maritime trades that will be working to build and operate these vessels. Next slide. And here's more information just on the jobs that are being created now and that we anticipate will be created. Next. And these jobs are going to be largely union jobs. We've seen virtually every developer has either signed or is in the process of negotiating project labor agreements with local and national trades. In fact, we're proud that one of our stalwart members, the biggest U.S. developer, Ørsted, just this week signed a nationwide agreement with the North America's Building Trades Union to cover all of their projects. So these are not just jobs, but these are good paying union jobs. Next slide. So that's all the good news, and there's a lot of it, but there are some headwinds. There are some challenges that we need to resolve. Because the theme here is supply chain and job creation. I have to start with some of the challenges of building that supply chain. Onshore companies like Siemens Gamesa need regulatory certainty and a long-term pipeline of leases and projects in order to pull the trigger on these massive investments. So, the more that we can ensure that that permitting processes are predictable and that there is a pipeline of leases, not just existing leases, but leases that are coming forward in future processes, just like we discussed, that's going to accelerate development. We need more tax credits from what was formerly Build Back Better. I would echo my co-panelists' thoughts on that. That is very important to accelerate the development of a domestic supply chain. And sometimes you get thrown curveballs, and right now we're dealing with some legislation in Congress that would impose mandates on maritime crewing that could really hinder the use of certain specialized vessels that don't exist in the U.S. for these first couple of projects while we build that supply chain. And so we are tracking that very closely and concerned about making sure that we take a broader view and don't impose very restrictive mandates that are going to hinder these first projects and sort of kneecap the industry before it even gets started. So second challenge, permitting coordination. Look, BOEM is the lead agency. They do a fantastic job. I can tell you, I've seen it firsthand. They are filled with really dedicated and bright and hardworking public servants. But it's a challenging structure. They have to coordinate with a myriad other federal agencies plus state governments, and then you even have local approvals when you start getting to onshore cable connection. It is a lot of work to coordinate and get everyone rowing in the same direction. So we are highly encouraging of more coordination, better communication, just everyone kind of working off the same hymn sheet when it comes to the bigger policy goals. We understand that there are always going to be differences of opinion, but we highly encourage collaboration towards that 30 gigawatts by 2030 goal. But look, government is people, and people can only be pushed so hard. We need more resources. The workload at BOEM and NOAA and other agencies has gone from 0 to 60 in the last 2 or 3 years, and there was some increase in funding in the FY22 budget, but it really hasn't quite kept up with just the sheer workload and complexity. So we need to make sure that our agencies on all levels are getting the resources needed to have the people in place who can make sure that these permits get processed without cutting corners, because we do want to make sure that the environmental impacts and socioeconomic impacts are adequately analyzed. Grid interconnection, boy, I couldn't have said it better than than Jim. It's a big problem. You can't run out of interconnection points before you've had a chance to build out the industry. So we support that transition from just every project having its own interconnection point to a regional mesh solution. And with the onshore upgrades that come with it, we just need to make sure that we do it in a very thoughtful way and don't strand projects with no way to get to shore. The point of making sure that regional transmission solutions and substations are sited in coordination with projects is a really important one. And then lastly, of course, anytime you have a new industry, you're going to face opposition from people who are afraid of things that they haven't seen in the United States. The primary opponents in this regard have been some commercial fishing interests. I want to emphasize some. I don't think it's in any way uniform. And maybe I can talk a little later about some ways that we're trying to work with fishermen and with BOEM to make sure that we address their concerns. Wealthy coastal landowners, NIMBYism is a thing, and dark money. Sometimes groups that just are threatened by clean energy funnel money through through groups that have standing to challenge. So we're keeping our eye on that. But I'll close there. I know we only have a little bit of time for questions, but I want to thank MACO for inviting American Clean Power to come speak to you.
Great, thank you, Josh, and welcome back. We do appreciate you, from that perspective of having worked in the Department of Interior as well. So I see our panelists are back on screen, so thank you all. We got some great questions. I think we're running a little low on time, so I'm going to do my best to try to mash things up a little bit here and make sure that we get to some of the great questions that are coming in. So Jim, I'm going to start with you. If you could maybe just speak a little bit to some of the environmental concerns that the BPU is looking into as you consider the solicitations, evaluate proposals, and how you're weighing some of those environmental factors as you're looking at different options for future transmission solutions.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mike. As I said, one of our main motivations for entering into this SAA process was the effort to try to minimize the number of cables and the number of shore crossings, the number of cable routes onshore, the number of POIs that might be impacted. That was a large motivation for us. I think a lot of folks have seen a map that I think has been referred to as the spaghetti approach, which is having all of the offshore projects, both current and proposed, bringing cable or cables to shore, and it really does end up looking like a kind of a messy bowl of spaghetti. And in addition to that, and I think Josh hit on this very perceptively, if you do it project by project, the best landing points get used up by the early projects, the best points of interconnection get used up by the early projects, the best offshore cable routes get used up by the early projects, and then you're left with increased cost, increased schedule risk, increased permitting risk, and increased potential for environmental and fisheries impact. So we really think that this coordinated approach will go a long way towards minimizing those impacts. Now, obviously, we still, even with this coordinated approach, and even in the, with this concept of collecting multiple projects offshore and then bringing them to shore, we still have ocean facilities. We will still have ocean substations or potentially AC/DC converter stations or collector stations. And obviously we'll still have cables needing to be installed leading to shore. So we are certainly not eliminating potential impacts, but we do think that this coordinated approach will minimize those impacts as compared to each project doing their thing at the particular time that project is approved.
Great, thank you. And you know, certainly a lot of echoes of what you say in New York as well, and I'm sure a lot of other states are seeing the same type of challenges. So absolutely, it looks like the path of the future, and the challenge is always, how do we get there now? And you know, the path of least resistance is not always the most efficient path or the one in our best long-term interest. So trying to reconcile those things is always a challenge. Chris, turning to you and keeping with the theme of kind of, you know, going from the near term to the longer term, how do you see sort of the navigational issues playing out over the long term as you're starting to build out the port, and as we're starting to see more and more industry come online and more port activity related to offshore wind, in addition to, as we heard in the last panel, some of the issues that we're seeing from you know, changes in some of the port traffic. You know, are there things that the ports can do now, or that you're thinking about to kind of plan for the future and think about how it all fits together?
Sure, that's a great question. I appreciate that. And I think, you know, we have a little bit of just, I say, luck on our side that we've had a significant dredging project well underway as we've begun to sort of reposition, and as offshore wind becomes more of a reality day by day. So the fact that we've for over 10 years now been working to finalize and really put in place a wider and deeper channel, which by all means should be near completion by the end of 2024. So we are over 50% complete with a major dredging project in both in our harbor and out to open ocean. So I think having the wider channels is critical and vital for all of this vessel activity. We do have the good fortune of being an active port. So I think within the harbor traffic, there'll be continued just, you know, I would say management of traffic. It's done very well today. And I think we have the ability to bring more vessel activity into this harbor without any concerns. But ultimately, when looking at the coastline and the future lease areas, and all of the various interested parties and voices involved in siting new lease areas, it's definitely something we are very much in tune to with various partners, both on this meeting today and others here in the Mid-Atlantic, and trying to make sure that those new defined areas are not of areas of conflict with current commercial traffic, other, you know, DoD activity, and even what was mentioned earlier, you know, with the spaceport that we have in Virginia, and having some of those potential risk from that activity. So again, I think it's one of collaboration. You know, I think it was mentioned by Josh, you know, obviously, and others. There, you know, obviously a comment period right now for Central Mid-Atlantic lease area, and so, you know, having that continued interaction with BOEM to provide that input, which we appreciate, and hopefully through the evaluation permitting process, some of these conflicts can be avoided, and they have been up to this point for most part.
Great, thank you, Chris. Yeah, these are busy places, right? I know from New York we can appreciate that, and the Port of New York, New Jersey, and I know in Virginia the Hampton Roads area is right up there when you add in some of that DoD activity. These are busy places, only getting busier. So I appreciate, you know, that thought. Moving to you, Josh. You kind of teased this a little bit in your talk, but maybe you can speak to some of the ways that your organization sees as maybe moving forward, addressing some of those thornier challenges. I know you raised a host of them on your last slide, so maybe pick one or two, you know, related to some of the impacts maybe to existing industries or those types of situations, and where you think we may be able to carve a path forward that's equitable and in the interest of everyone.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, happy to sort of throw out fisheries as an example. Obviously, they're a big, existing ocean user, and one that has been vocal about their concerns. We believe that offshore wind and commercial fishing cannot just coexist, but actually thrive together. Both in terms of climate benefits. The biggest threat to fishing right now is our warming oceans. Job creation, those jobs are available to anyone who works the sea. And biological synergies. You look at the recent Block Island study of the Block Island wind farm that showed no adverse impacts to fishing populations, and actually some benefits in terms of creation of new habitats. All of that said, look, we understand that there's still skepticism. This is a new industry in the U.S. It's been around in Europe. There is a long track record there of offshore wind being able to coexist, but we want to provide some assurances and sort of address the anxiety and the uncertainty. And so we've actually advocated both publicly and with BOEM for creating a fisheries compensation fund that could actually be either regional or even nationwide. That would provide relief in the event that there are demonstrated impacts to commercial fishing from construction, operation, even decommissioning of these facilities. But this fund could also be used sort of forward-looking way to provide grants to help commercial fishermen adapt to the presence of new structures, perhaps radar upgrades, new gear that will make it easy to fish, to operate within wind farms. The current status quo seems to be sort of negotiating on a very project by project, case by case basis with the states at the table. It's just not working. It's not working for anyone, not working for our members, not working for states, not working for the federal family, and definitely not working for fishermen. So we think that a predictable third-party fund with a predictable source of funding is the right way to go. And we've proposed using bidding credits and exchanging bidding credits for payments and for developer payments into a third-party fund run by a reputable entity. And a lot of devil's in the details. A lot of work would need to be done to figure out who would run the fund, how it would be structured, who would administer it, how claims might be paid out, how other money might be paid out. But we really welcome this conversation. We've been having conversations with BOEM, and we've started talking with states like New York, and even with having the beginnings of conversations with fisheries groups. But we think that a national compensation fund would be a win-win-win-win for all the stakeholders at the table, and kind of right in MACO's wheelhouse in terms of working to really kind of get ocean users working together and finding productive solutions.
Great, thank you, Josh. We have time, I think, for one more question, and I'm going to do my best to bundle a few of the comments that are coming in here about the importance of regional coordination. And I think each of you has spoken, from your vantage point about some of the efforts that are underway to push the industry forward, to do it in a responsible way. So where does MACO fit into this? Are there opportunities here for us to play a role either in facilitating some of the dialogue or in addressing some of the shared challenges? Josh just mentioned a shared challenge, and everybody is concerned about the impacts to our existing users like the commercial fishers. Jim, from your perspective, we're crossing different system operators, right? When you look from PJM to the NYISO, and then in New York, we look up to the New England ISO, and there's a whole different set of stakeholders. And then to you, Chris, at a regional level, there's competition for some of these port upgrades and some of the jobs and attendant workforce. But there's also so much that needs to be done that even if everybody had full build out, would we even be there? So from your various perspectives, maybe just a quick reflection, given that we're short on time here, where is there an opportunity for us to add value, whether it's in information sharing or building new partnerships, or something entirely different?
I'll take the first shot at that. I think there is absolutely a critical role that needs to be played in bringing the regional partners together. I think it's critically important that we talk to each other. Our New Jersey's fishermen fish in New York waters and in Massachusetts waters, and Massachusetts fishermen likewise fish in other states' waters. This is a very state-by-state initiative, offshore wind, that we've all embarked on. It is very much interrelated within the region. So I think a role in bringing states together, identifying specific issues where we may be able to find common ground. I think that's a key role that could be played in regional collaboration.
And I'll pick up from there, Jim. I think you're right. I think the regional collaboration is going to be critical, especially on the supply chain and marshaling side of the equation. As you so well put in your slides, focusing on the cost and making sure that providing that lowest cost of energy, and trying to find these partnerships to obviously help support those efforts and bringing costs down. There are certain attributes Virginia can do and other harbors can do much better. And so I know that's something we've already established between North Carolina and Maryland and our state here in Virginia, trying to find those areas where it isn't a zero sum. I think there's enough to this massive opportunity in front of us where each respective harbor and state is going to find certain pieces of business that are going to thrive and really support the growth of offshore wind on the East Coast.
Bring us home, Josh.
I mean, fishing compensation would be a great a great area where we'd love to have MACO at the table. But look, these leasing processes, where our eye is very squarely on the Central Atlantic planning process. I think partnering with MACO and with Boeing to sort of make sure that the deconfliction process is done as transparently as possible, so that when the wind energy areas are announced, everyone feels like they've been heard, and their concerns have been incorporated and at least sort of explained, whether they are incorporated or whether they're not, that at least there's a good explanation is provided. I think that would be really helpful. But happy to discuss more offline.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to our panelists. We've gone a little over, and I know our forum planning team behind the scenes is probably not happy with me, but I think it's been a great conversation. I want to thank everybody who submitted questions in the chat. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but I do think this has been a great start in provoking some additional conversations and hopefully expanding our thinking a little bit. We all tend to kind of work within our own spheres of influence and bringing in some outside voices and folks who are also very heavily invested in some of these same issues, but maybe from a different perspective. Going back to our keynote speaker and thinking about new people coming in, new ideas coming in, new thoughts coming in, and that really helps shake us up and maybe gets us moving forward in an even better direction. Some great comments in here, so I would encourage everybody to please look at the chat. Tony's asking some existential questions about reconciling issues related to future security, energy supply. I think that's something, as we all kind of work in our day-to-day, but then we're also part of the bigger world, something we all think about, and maybe just as a parting thought, how do we reconcile, the messages that are always coming out related to, ongoing energy supply constraints or ongoing strife in a certain part of the world, whether it be in Europe or somewhere else. We have kind of a long-term vision here related to the climate threat and the sense of urgency that we have, but none of this happens in a bubble. So how do we reconcile some of these ongoing issues outside of our sphere of influence with the end goals that we all share, and to do so in a responsible way that achieves our environmental objectives, keeps costs low, and ultimately delivers the renewable energy resources we need. So thank you, everybody. Great comments. Really appreciate the panelists. And I have completely blown through our entire break, so apologies, but I will turn it over to our moderator, Tony, or whomever might be bringing us into this final panel, which I think is moderated by me, Tony. So maybe I'm just turning it back to myself, huh?